Welcome to today's topic, which is natural responsiveness in the advanced HTML and CSS course. The first step to making responsive websites is using techniques that are naturally flexible. In a later lesson, we will learn how to completely rearrange items on a page based on screen size. But in most cases, it's preferable to rely on tools like Flexbox and Grid to make your pages work on a wide range of screens first. Learning outcomes. You will learn a few tips for keeping your sites naturally responsive. So what is naturally responsive? You will ask. Let's get into it. Plain HTML with no CSS is responsive. Check this out and shrink your browser down to the size of a phone. It works perfectly. You could read that site on an Apple Watch. So let's check this out. So this is just text. How do I make it small? I can use my DevTools. So let me put in my DevTools. Let me increase the font size. And as you can see, there is no horizontal scroll, only up till there. So horizontal scroll only appears because of the responsive word. Other than that, it's mostly clear. So everything falls in place. So this is naturally responsive. You could read that site on an Apple Watch just by scrolling through it. It's not realistic for every website you create to be as simple as plain text on a page, but it is important to keep in mind that most of the elements you are using to build your project are responsive until you change that with CSS. If you approach your project with this mindset and do your best to maintain that natural responsiveness, you might find that there isn't that much extra you would need to do to make your sites properly responsive. So "you" is a keyword. So whatever you are doing to change the CSS, you have to be mindful of that. The rest of this lesson is a list of tips you can use to maintain natural responsiveness, which is the nature of text. The viewport meta tag. When mobile phones first started getting web browsers, which is like 15-20 years back, most websites were not optimized for such small screen resolutions. To get around this, most phone browsers, at that time I remember, it was like websites used to have a fixed width, so 960 pixel, or some would be just 800 pixels. And that was also the width of most desktops. So it would be fixed to those widths, and the designer would design around that. So I have actually coded at that time. To get around this, most phone browsers simply simulated a larger screen and displayed a zoomed out version of that page. These days, however, we almost never want that behavior, so we have to specify what we want our websites to be viewed at the actual non-zoomed screen resolution. For this reason, you should add this snippet into the head of your HTML file in just about every project you work on. So we have seen this in our emmet also. Whenever we put it by default, there will always be this viewport tag. Meta name viewport, content width, device width, initial scale is 1. It simply set the initial width of the web page to the size of the actual screen you are viewing it on and telling it not to zoom in or out. Easy. Avoid fixed width and height. The number one enemy of flexibility is a fixed width on an element. If you put width 600 pixel on anything, then it will never be able to shrink below that width, which ruins your chances of getting that thing to fit on most phone screens. Likewise, sticking a fixed height on an element can cause issues if the contents of that element run out of the room. Obviously, the context will determine what works in a given situation, but as an easy fix in many cases is replacing width or height with max width or min height. Min width and max height are also valid and may be useful depending on the context you are working at. In the following example, notice how the fixed width causes our div to overflow the screen. Change it to max width and watch it shrink down to fit the preview screen. Click fork on code pen, then save, and navigate to the open live view in a new window icon at the bottom to see it in full window size. Try changing the size of the window to see how max width works. When a max width is defined, the element will not exceed that width, but will shrink if the screen is too small to accommodate it. Let's look at in this code pen. So how we do this, we have a fixed width, we can see. So at a 0.5x, so here we can see this is the full size, but at 0.5 zoom, it goes outside the screen. So what we should use 100%. Let's run on that. So 100% just a little bit out. It is going a little bit out of the whole screen, you can see. So if we want to make it, because this by default this has some margin padding, this will have some margin padding. So if we go for 90%, maybe it will now be in the screen 25x zoom. It will be just slightly out in the 50x zoom. So this example shown below demonstrates the problem with static heights. So in this one, what we're supposed to do, max width, and watch it shrink down to. So change it to max width. Instead of 600, which was the initial 600 pixel initially. So instead we have it as max width. Now that is the max width. So now it is contained. It's contained within the viewport. So there is no horizontal scrolling. This example shown below demonstrates the problem with static heights. On a full-size screen, the text would fit inside the pink box just fine, but here on this cramped embed, it overflows. Let's look at it. So here it is overflowing. It's overflowing outside that pink box. So if we have a max height here, this is our max height, and our overflow, yeah, so it stays inside of it. Div is 300 pixels more, but to grow instead of causing an overflow when the text gets cramped. In this case, changing height to min height will fix the issue. So I did a max height. Let me do a min height. It will have the similar effect. So if it is smaller, it's inside, and it just grows. The div will grow. So min height is 300. The minimum height is always 300, but it can grow beyond it. So we never fix the width or the height. We don't fix anything if we want a flexible, responsive layout. Avoid heights altogether. In most cases, you should avoid setting a height altogether. There are some exceptions to this rule, headers and footers perhaps, which need to have a fixed height. But you should prefer using margin and padding to increase space around your content. Using margin and padding will keep your elements flexible, no matter what the content inside does, when fixed widths are appropriate. Obviously, there are cases when a fixed width is appropriate. It's hard to make a universal rule, but in general, the smaller your widths, the more likely it's fine to make them fixed. For example, a 32 pix icon on your page isn't going to benefit from using max width because you probably don't want it to shrink. So the icon will always be 32 pix in a mobile or on a large screen, on a laptop or a maximum extra wide screen. Likewise, the 250px sidebar probably needs to always be 250px. As with anything, you just need to consider your options and pick what needs to be the most appropriate. So sidebars in smaller screens, it will be a slide in. So it will slide in, you will have a hamburger menu, and using that you can slide in your sidebar or the menu bar and get responsiveness in your application. Use flex and grid. Here's a statement so obvious that it sounds like a joke. Flexbox was created to enable the creation of flexible layouts. Simply using flex and grid doesn't necessarily guarantee perfect responsiveness, but they are really helpful tools. You have already learned about the relevant properties here, but things like flex wrap and the grid's min-max, autofill, and similar properties can make some impressively responsive layouts without much extra work. So you need to know all these properties in and out. So go through these CSS properties in depth. Assignment. Read using the viewport meta tag on MDN to get a little more background and detail about the viewport meta tag and the nature of screen resolutions. Using percentages in CSS. So is it an article on codiloid.com that tackles another common pitfall. Min-max in autofilling repeating tracks demonstrates a really nice responsive grid feature. So this is on grid by example. It's a grid by example. Knowledge check. So what did you learn in this section? Why should you avoid fixed width? Because then it will not overflow on smaller screens. Why should we avoid fixed height? Then you will not have text overflowing outside of your container divs in smaller windows, in smaller screens. In what situation might it be appropriate to use a fixed height or width? So for headers, footers, or sidebars, you would want to have this fixed height width. Why would you, or in case of icons also we saw, why should you avoid percentages? So percentages in smaller screens. So if you have a 20%, a small screen will be very much smaller than what you are intended to be, maybe for a sidebar. But in a small screen, it will look really thin. Additional resources in this article. So there are none. We have all the context in this chapter. So with that, we will move on to the next one.